Hello everybody! JGC Anime here, and today we are going to be reviewing The Strongest Sage with the Weakest Crest, or Shikakumonno no Saikyo Kenja. I probably said that wrong, but whatever. So, yeah, today we're going to be reviewing that series, so yeah, let's just hop right into this. So, what is The Strongest Sage with the Weakest Crest? It's about a guy who is so powerful, he feels like he can't obtain any more power, so he reincarnates with a new crest, because apparently people have crests in this world, and he wants the strongest crest, so he reincarnates, and then he gets that crest, but it's now labeled as the weakest crest, and stuff about demons and other stuff that is honestly rushed through so much in the first episode that I can't remember it all. But that's a terrible description, but that's what I can kind of describe it as. And yeah, so now it's just the adventures of our main character. Is it Matthias? I don't know. I'm gonna say Matthias. And his crew of Luri, Iris, and Alma, or Alma. I don't know. So yeah, it's just their adventures as he's the strongest sage with the weakest crest. Well, that's kind of what I can describe it as, basically. Yeah. So yeah, let's just hop right into some spoiler-free thoughts. Actually, before we do that, I want to quickly explain something random. I actually originally wasn't even going to watch this anime. Like, originally the concept intrigued me, but then I heard the Japanese voice for the main character, Matthias, and that sounded like this.
確かに、この第4問は魔法付与には向いてない。
Now, some of you might not have had a problem with that voice, but I thought it sounded terrible. I thought, when I was watching the Japanese trailer for this show, I thought the main character just hadn't even talked yet. I honestly thought he hadn't spoken. Then I learned, wait a minute, that is meant to be the main character's voice? And I didn't want to watch the show after that, because that's not the first time that has happened in both Japanese and in English shows, where I just feel like a voice doesn't fit right for a role, so I have to watch it in another language, or sometimes it's just as bad. Like, I remember I still have yet to watch The Faraway Paladin because I don't like the voice for him in the sub or the dub. Sure, the dub sounds a little bit better for like the main character, but in the sub I just can't really, I don't like it all. So I end up just not watching these shows. But unlike the issue with The Faraway Paladin, this show's dub, the voice actor who plays Matthias in the dub actually does a really, in my opinion, much better voice, I guess you could say. Like, the voice actor who played Matthias did a much better job. Well, the voices still weren't that, like, tolerable. There were times when the voice actors just didn't try acting at all, and it was very off. But unlike the sub, where I just couldn't take it seriously every single time the Matthias opened his mouth, I couldn't stand it. So the dub was at least tolerable, and I could take it. So it made it easier to sit through. And yeah, so enough talk about that. Let's just hop into some spoiler-free thoughts. So hopping into some spoiler-free thoughts. From the first 8 episodes of the show, like for the first 8 episodes, I actually really enjoyed it. Like, I thought it was fun, but however, not for the reasons you might think. Like, in terms of the actual story, it's not that good. Like, the comedy can be subpar at times, although sometimes it does get chuckles out of me. And the characters really aren't interesting. They lack any real personality to them. And the story is just all over the place, especially with the fact that a majority of it is just kind of rushed through. In fact, I hear like there's this whole segment from the light novels that they completely cut out in the anime. And yeah, in terms of like an actual story, it's not that great. The animation is mediocre, and overall it's just not that great of a story. However, because it was so mediocre, or in a sense I could call it bad, because it was so bad, I had an amazing time with it. Like, I was laughing my head off while I was watching for all the wrong reasons, because there were like there's so many random moments that made me laugh for unintentional reasons, such as a character being like, look over there, and then another character looks, they're like, oh my gosh, what is that? And then the character's just like, oh my gosh, it's this thing that you just stated it was. And it's just so funny, because they'll be like, hey, look, it's a demon. Oh my gosh, it is a demon. Like, dude, you didn't have to repeat that other character. And it happens so much in the show. There's a bunch of little random sound effects here and there where they're just randomly go like, and it's not even like for movement. They just do the sound for some reason. And overall, Just there were so many moments in this series that made me laugh for the wrong reasons, such as a random plot point that they introduced. It's like, I can't remember the full details, but it was like they introduced this villain where they treat them like it's such a big deal. It's such a big threat. And then after a slice from a single blade or something, I don't remember without trying to spoil it, they're done. Like the villain's done. And I think it's actually the first episode that this happened where they were like, oh my gosh, and just without spoiling too much, there was like this villain that enters there's like this big villain in the first episode, which I don't say big, it was kind of a small villain, but it was a small villain, and everyone was building up like it was some big villain, and I was just like, okay, yeah, let's see how it goes, and the main character defeats it in like 3 seconds. Oh man. Honestly, this show rushes through so many things with so many villains being rushed through, and I feel like it's just trying to fill in as much as it can to try to keep you on your toes, but it's such a mediocre storyline. Like, all that stuff made me laugh instead of like feel intense or stressful. Even the last villain that comes into the series, which I'm not going to talk about until like a spoiler section maybe, they're not that, they're built up like this big threat, and it kind of is for a bit, but the way it ends does make me laugh personally just because of how it ended. And overall, it just felt like there was something weirdly off about this show. Like, it wasn't amazing, but it wasn't terrible. And it's just, I was hoping that we'd continue like this throughout the whole show, because I was ready to like give this anime's review like the title of it's terrible, I love it or something, but that has changed thanks to the last few episodes. And yeah, so that's all I can really say without spoiling too much, because I've already kind of spoiled a bit here. So we're just going to hop into the spoiler section. Here's a timestamp to when the spoiler section will conclude. And yeah, that's all we have to say other than the fact that if you have seen the show, I'd recommend sticking around for the spoiler section. However, if you haven't, you should skip to the end. But if you have, I recommend sticking around to hear my full thoughts. So yeah, let's just talk about the spoilers, and after I catch up in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so first thing to talk about is the final villain. The final villain, I can't remember their name, even though I literally just finished this show earlier today. The main villain is built to be this big threat that Mattias actually kind of struggles against for like 5-10 minutes of the last episode. He also struggles with it a bit throughout the previous episode, but in the end, he gets given some kind of sword, which gets power through suicide. Like, he has to get killed, so it takes the person's life force and then revives them and makes them stronger, where he then instantly takes out the big threat with a single shot from that sword, or like through a few shots. And it's just like, dude, it doesn't really feel like some big finale that was being built up with, because it even ends with the main villain saying, oh yeah, by the way, there's more like me out there, so yeah, you won't stand a chance against them. But it felt a little lackluster for a finale. Like, I was imagining a cool fight scene, but it was mostly just little like flashing stars, which I guess you could say count as something, but honestly, I just kind of expected a little more. I wasn't expecting like the last episode of One Punch Man Season 1, I think it was the last episode, where Saitama just goes all out, full throttle, just destroying the enemy in this amazing fight scene that's just so incredible to watch. I was at least expecting something more than two little stars clashing against one another. Overall, though, it wasn't the worst thing I have seen. One thing I definitely have a problem with is probably Mattias himself. Like, the whole thing is that as a main character, he wants to be stronger and face stronger opponents and stuff, like he wants to be the strongest there is. And so when I pictured his character, I pictured a guy who was always looking for a bigger, stronger fight and was always trying to make it to the top of everything and just be super OP. But this guy is not. Like, his reincarnation is kind of a wuss, and he has like this romance going on with this other character called Luri, who I mentioned earlier, who honestly, other than like the archer girl, who her name is Alma, Luri is probably one of the more uninteresting members of the cast. Like, to me, probably the most standout character, like probably one of my favorites, has got to be Iris, a dragon who could turn into a human, like one of those types of characters, who honestly I really loved in this season for the one reason that you might not think, but it's actually because she's probably one of the few characters that's actually fun to watch. Like everyone else, I just kind of watch for the sake of the story, but she is the one character in this season that and honestly in this show, that I just had such a fun time watching because of her personality. It was just so much fun, and I really liked her character a lot. Maybe that's also why I really liked another character called, I think it was Gaius or something, who is just like this meant to be powerful warrior, but ends up getting beaten by Matthias, who is a lot of fun too. Like maybe I just like the wild cards of the group, but just those characters stand out the best for me, and I really like them. But most of the characters are boring, especially Matthias, who when I saw his character, I was just, as I mentioned before, expecting someone who would have like a really interesting personality similar to Leon Val Bartfort from Trapped in a Dating Sim. But honestly, his personality was very mediocre. Like it felt very generic protagonist-esque. Where I like the fact that he already has a love interest from Luri, Luri, I don't know. But I kind of like the fact that there's a love interest between them, but like there's love between them, but honestly, it's probably one of the more mediocre parts of the story. And plus half the time they kind of forget about it because they just mainly bring it back in for comedic moments. Like they rarely ever have important moments dedicated to their relationship growing. Like, I almost thought it was going to be similar to the romance between the main character and his romantic interest in, I think it was The Wise Man's Grandchild or something, which honestly was a show I really liked. I thought it was a really good show where the love interest actually has developments with the main character. This one doesn't really do anything with that. And honestly, by the end of the story, it was kind of disappointing because, as I mentioned before, for the first 8 or so episodes, I was having such a fun time with how bad it was. But then came the last few episodes, especially with the last 2, where it got too like serious to the point where I just couldn't even make fun of it. And that kind of ruined it to the point where it made it from so bad that I loved it to it was just incredibly mediocre. Like it just wasn't anything special. It didn't stand out in any way. It wasn't hilariously bad like Soma Spider So What, and it wasn't like just entertaining to watch. Everything about it just felt so empty by the end that I was kind of upset at how it didn't end in a dumb way to the point that I could laugh at it. And it was fine overall because of the fact of that ending with the last few episodes. It just ended up being fine. It wasn't a fantastic show. It wasn't a terrible show. It was just fine. And that upsets me. Still, I guess it wasn't a terrible show, but overall, it definitely was as mediocre as I thought it would be. And I do not regret sitting down and watching it in dub because honestly, I don't think I would have finished it if I tried watching it in sub. I don't care what all you sub elitists say. This show was impossible to watch in sub for me. It was impossible. That was like asking to turn water into wine. I could not do it. It would literally be impossible. Like I would not be able to watch this subbed. It'd be impossible. But yeah, I guess that's all I really have to say about that. So we're at the conclusion of this video, and what are my final thoughts? It's fine. There were moments I laughed, moments I mostly laughed, but mainly because it was such a bad story that I really couldn't help but laugh at times. But it was overall, again, it's just fine. The last few episodes really ruined things for me with how incredibly mediocre they were, thus turning this from what was going to be a so bad it's good type of thing like Soma Spider So What to just being mediocre, like those shows like You in the Haunted Hot Springs or In Another World with My Smartphone, where they were just fine. So yeah, that's all I really have to say about that. So I give my final rating for the show. I'll give it my final rating for this show is a 6 out of 10. It wasn't amazing, it wasn't terrible, it was going to be hilariously bad like Soma Spider So What, but in the end it didn't stick with that. And honestly, I just lost the amount of fun I had at the start. So yeah, thank you all for watching. If you're new to the JGC Anime channel, don't forget to subscribe. I always welcome new anime fans to the channel. And yeah, that's all I really have to say. So I thank you all for watching, and I will see you all around. Peace!